talking to myself again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on that.
Good evening and welcome to NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wraith, and it's no more three amigos because it's the Fab Four. Oh, here's and Mitch. How are you, lads?
I thought that was ladies screaming out.
It was some groupies that we've picked up since Keith joined the show. But a big welcome to Ben Jacobs as well. It's a pleasure to have you on, Ben. You've done a few shows with myself, Talk and Takeover, and it's great that you could join us tonight, mate. And I know it's what a lot of Newcastle fans wanted to see you and Keith on the same show, chewing the fat. So thanks for joining us, Ben.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. I thought the screaming might have been for my introduction, and I also should say that I might just duck down a little bit more like to this, because then I'm in keeping with that cropped head in the promotional poster where the rest of my body had just disappeared. I do have a body, I can promise you that.
Yeah, it's down to John, I'm afraid, and he often does these flyers for us, and they made us look terrible over the last 12 months. I've got to be perfectly honest, some of us more than others. I've got to say thank you to the NUFC Mags on Twitter who came up with the concept and the idea, and it was his name that I thought was best for the new show on the Friday. So big thank you to you, mate. I hope you get a few followers out of that. It was his suggestion and his design for the cover. Not often we go with somebody else's design, although John from Jab did add Ben's head, so he is responsible for that. And I also just want to get a couple of these in because a lot of people still buying the merchandise, buying the T-shirts and sending pictures in, and it's nice when people send them. So Harry, thanks for that, mate. Glad that got to you. And here's Joe, Tune Tipster. Yes. On the drink, Tune Tipple, that is. So he will be getting us an email across at some point later, just to give us the rundown on the odds for the Champions League and for the playoffs this weekend. And people seem to be sending me this constantly. The percentage of fans who are bald. Here we go. Newcastle, of course, 49%. And me and Keith, in keeping with the percentages, are certainly bald. So thanks for sending us that. I've received that about 50 times from people. Also, a big thank you to everybody who was, for some reason, said that everything is my fault. And this seems to have become quite popular on Twitter this week. So Nick, who's a regular from the Felon, says, no tuna crunch in Felon Greg's this afternoon. Only one person to blame. Bloody Steve Wraith. Must have been back in his old manor eating me favourite. He knows that's me favourite too. Garfield Thompson says, don't blame it on the sunshine. Don't blame it on the moonlight. Don't blame it on the good times. Blame it on Steve Wraith. He got a little bit musical with his accusation. And Dave Sanderson says, FFS, I've just spilt my cup of tea all over the parts of my body that hot tea should not touch. I blame Steve Wraith. This was a little bit different from Michael. He says, I'm sorry, Geordie Dentist, Old Etonian, but this is definitely Steve Wraith's fault. That was the fight that we saw on Twitter this week between a spectator and a linesman. And we'll finish off with that one. Real Madrid's Santiago Bernabeu Stadium is on fire. It's clearly Steve Wraith's fault. So thanks for all of those. Certainly kept us amused. And thanks to John from QTech, who's now knocked up a T-shirt with "Everything is my fault" on. So I can see this is going to run and run. Now, I did promise to do this at the start of the show. Dodo Bird, who often comments in the comment section, certainly enjoys the Gibbo and Supermax section, has sent us a present collectively. Not just the three amigos, Keith, Ben, Mick Lowe's, the ladies, the Retro Show, Liam Kennedy, you name it. He's not just sent one person, he sent us this. So he's got all the names of the shows on the front. He's put that rather disturbing image on the back. And he just says, I've got to open it live on air. So he dropped it off at the office today. No. Hold on, there's a letter inside.
Is it the FA Cup for me?
Well, it's quite impressive. It's quite impressive, Ben. Oh, there's a letter. I've got to read the letter. Hello, Steve and NUFC Matters. Well, as promised, I have sent you and the whole NUFC Matters family a gift for you all to share. It is a big thank you to everyone who has contributed and generously given up their time, subscribers, sponsors, fans, and special guests. To all of them, we are so grateful. The show has given us a voice and a listening ear. It has given us an opportunity to ask questions and for them to be answered by yourself and others when there's been no one else. Football is a great leveller, which brings so many people together from so many different walks of life, age groups, even politics. On match day, we are all as one, united, Newcastle United. Over the last few years, this has been put to the test, but the fans have stuck by their club where others would have not. This is why our fans are so special and deserve much more and to be appreciated. I hope the good times return soon and we all get back to normality, going to the match, having a pint and seeing our friends. It's been a horrendous 12 months for so many different reasons, which is why we all appreciate what you've done, Steve. I used to watch local news each night, but not done so for the last 14 months since your show began. I only just found out last night Pam Royal's not there anymore. Anyway, Steve, thank you for all you've done in getting us through this difficult period. You've made a difference. I hope the cup will be a reminder of that in many years to come. Well done, mate. Dodo Bird. Thank you very much, mate. That, honestly, from everybody at NUFC Matters, mate, that is much appreciated. You can't really see it on there, guys, but it's actually got NUFC Matters on the front. It's got the Dodo Bird Cup season 2021, and he's got all the shows on. He's got Think Before You Tweet on there. He's got the two campaigns. He's got Malcolm and the Three Amigos are on there, the worldwide show. He hasn't missed anything. Fantastic. Dodo Bird, thank you very much. A long time since I've held a cup up like that, but that means a lot, mate. Thank you very much. And big thank you to everybody out there. Okay, without further ado, that's all the public service announcements. Let's talk to you, Keith, first. And first time you've been on a show with Ben. So let's do the right thing. Let's put Ben up there with you. This is it. I mean, look, there's a lot being made of it on Twitter this week. The thing is, guys, you both report the facts that you get. So, Keith, I mean, anything really you want to say with regards to Ben's coverage and what he's talked about over the last 12 months?
Oh, lots and lots. I mean, you all know, everybody knows that I'm just a football fan, so I can't really make mistakes as such, because all I am is just a passionate fan. It's the same way Ben supports Leicester. I'm a Newcastle fan, but I'm first, second and third. I've got no agenda. My agenda is just getting the takeover. When that's done, I'll disappear. And I've given up a lot to do it. So when I sit here tonight, I've got more questions than answers, but I'll answer any questions anyone wants to give us. There's various people who's got in touch with this week, and what they've said is get Ben to slow down, because some of the Geordies don't sort of understand. You go 100 miles an hour, Ben, and they're saying like there's not like a breaking point. And they've said to us like you seem to cover everything when they ask you questions. So if I ask you a question, it'll be straightforward. It'll be simple. I'm not a super bright guy. I'll just ask you a straightforward, simple question. And if you're not answering it, I'll go answer the question. So I just want to learn more about you tonight and find out what you're about. And I've got no intentions of being rude or discourteous to you, because I'm not that kind of person. I want to understand you because I think you're a bright fella. You're a football fan, but that's one of the questions I've got is, your motivations, what it's about, whether it's football fan first. So if I spoke to somebody like Liam Kennedy, he's a football fan and he'd never do anything beyond Newcastle, but then he's a journalist as well. But I've given him stories that would make TV, and he's held them back because he had to. And what I'm trying to find out about Ben Jacobs is what is your driver, and where do you get where do you earn from? And I want to come on to that in a moment. But the first time I ever met you was the first time I've heard of you really was around about the 16th of November, because it's quite significant to me, this, because there was myself and a guy called Gordon Steen, and I've never met him, Ben, before. I've never met a lad before in my life, but we formed NCSL, and we were just two fans that thought Newcastle was being wronged, and we still feel that today. In fact, we feel it more today than we did back then. When we listen to you, it comes over, Ben, and this is with respect, that you think the EPL has got a strong case. I think that their case is dog shit. I think if their case was anything near like what they think it is, they'd run it, and they would run the case with me. But what it is, Ben, is they dance around. And what I wanted to understand was, of what part are you talking from Ben Jacobs' opinion because you've seen evidence that makes their case strong? And what part are you talking from the EPL in your ear saying, tell them this? And there's a reason for that. And so it's really important because on the 16th of November, I was sat with Gordon Sting. It's an interesting story, this, because I've never really revealed on TV, on podcasts. But we were doing Manchester City. I was driving on the road on the 15th, and I said, you know, there's something about Man City just keeps plaguing me. And now everybody out there talks about, oh, this happened at Crystal Palace, this happened at Wolves, this happened at Man City. None of that was in the public domain, and none of that was known to the club, buyers, sellers, or anything until I started researching it. We put a team onto it, and we dug and dug and dug. And when we were doing Man City that night, we were deep into it. We got a letter about 5:15. It was late at night, or like late in the working day, from Bird and Bird, and it was a 9-page response to my letter before action. And most of the fans, Ben, thought that they were probably split 50-50 over here. You know, we didn't have all the backing then, Ben. People didn't necessarily believe in us. And what they said to us was, they said, you'll get a 2-page letter, a 2-line letter. They'll just tell you to get stuff. And we got a 9-page letter, and that caused a series of things to happen. And it's very significant, Ben, because you were involved in this. And so what I want to do is help you explain your side, because a lot of people here have still got a lot of questions on that. You know, this thing me and Gordon have got questions about it. I know the club and the EPL have fought over it, but your name keeps coming up. And what happened was, we got that letter that night at, say, tea time, and we sat that night doing the Man City work. We said, look, we'll journey on, and we sent it to a QC, a competition QC called Robert O'Donoghue. And when we gave him that letter, we said, what do you think? And he said, wow. He says, they've took you serious. And you actually mentioned that in a tweet later, but he said, you've took you serious, Keith, because to get 9 pages out of Bird and Bird, they've certainly taken what you're saying with serious intent. And then the next morning, we had two of the people helping us at NCSL, and we just give them a call and said, look, we've had a letter, lads. We can't tell you what's in it, but needless to say, we take legal advice. And we went away to take legal advice about it. And there was one part of that letter really concerned us. It really concerned us big time, and we didn't know what to do with it. And I've never told anybody on the Newcastle circuit, or none of these lads on here, about my letter, the 9-pager. And you lads can vouch for that. No, I've never ever gone to you and said, this is my letter off Bird and Bird before action. And all the documents I've been given off them, I've kept them myself. So at about 10 o'clock, I was in talks with the QC, and he was giving us his heads up on the letter. And I don't mind sharing with you what he said, because in the letter, they leveled certain things at me. In short, they told us that the letter had come through to just me and Gordon, and it said that I didn't have enough money. Well, how could they ever know that? And as it happens, Ben, I'll put on record here, I've got enough money to run this case on my own. And Gordon's a comfortable guy as well. So that was just rubbish. But that's what EPL do. When you got the EPL with a challenge, they automatically go to defense mode, and then they start lying. And I tell you what, I love them and me on a lie detector, the EPL and me, and see who comes out best. So I'm getting told I've got no money when I knew I had sufficient money to run the case. Then the next thing I get told is I haven't got standing. It was quite important, because standing is a legal term that people need to understand. My QC and my legal team had shown me how I had standing. So they're not going to run a case and charge me a considerable 5-figure sum when they didn't have standing, because it wouldn't have got off the ground. But that's what they said to us. The next thing they said is they wouldn't expedite the case. So they wouldn't work with me to get it out. Even though I'm a football fan, and even though football is nothing without fans, they were not prepared to help me get this case out. Because don't forget, they've got a great case, and my case is rubbish. But they wouldn't help us. So I'm this bit aggrieved. And then further in the letter, they then say something else. That one of the reasons they're not going to expedite it. So I'm thinking, bloody hell, what to do with this? And I didn't know what to do with the letter. And I'm listening to QC, and he told us what to do. At 1 o'clock, I stood there and thought, right, I'm going to have to put something out. So I put a tweet out. It said, we've received the EPL substantive 9-page response. It's now with our competition team led by Robert O'Donoghue QC. We'll announce our next move in our determination to progress the matter. Stand together as fans for answers United will remain. Okay, so all I was doing was putting a call out to the fans to say, we have got a letter, it's 9 pages, we have been taken serious, bear with us because our QC's onto it. And then I went back to QC, I said, put the tweet out, he approved it, and off we went. I went to a meeting, and I started getting texts through the meeting, and I got texts of various people saying, Ben Jacobs has got your letter. I said, you can't have my letter, because their stress to me was extremely confidential. They stressed to me that I couldn't do anything with it. And you were quoting things out that letter, and I'll go through some of the tweets. You first start at 2 minutes past 2 in the afternoon, and you say on the 17th of November, this is the following day we had a letter, spoken to the Premier League source this morning about the response to the NCSL letter before action. They, that's the EPL, remain confident in their legal position and have denied breach of competition law. That was interesting because in the letter, the QC said it was the worst attempt he'd ever seen to deny competition law, but it was good that you put this down. They also questioned NCSL's standing. There's no way in the world would you be able to put that down, Ben, if you didn't have the letter or if you weren't some part of the letter. You then did the next tweet, which said NCSL must prove they've been financially or directly affected by the Premier League's conduct. This will mean convincing a judge the Premier League forced a bid withdrawal, denying investment to both club and community. Well, that's a matter to prove rather than just allege. And then you put at the end, without official support from NUFC. I read that and I thought, why do I need support of NUFC? I actually had support of everybody. Remember, I'd gone and checked before I spent any money. There was a willing buyer and a willing seller. So I think I had as much support as I ever needed. What you were saying in here, and I think you were saying on behalf of the Premier League, that I needed the support of the club to do this. I don't. I just have to prove that I've been in some way financially affected by the actions of the Premier League, and then I'm allowed to take an action by law. The next tweet you put out, this is all happening at 2 o'clock. The Premier League have not provided disclosure of relevant documents. It's unclear what relevant documents are. If they didn't know what I was after, then they should have asked us. But they wrote this 9-page letter, and they've obviously told you that they're unaware what relevant documents are. The best thing, if you don't know what somebody wants, is to ask them. But what is clear is if NCSL want privileged information, they're going to have to go to court for it. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's why you do a letter before court, to go to court. This is likely to be expensive and take time. Okay? The next tweet comes out. It's very difficult to get an expedited case. That's what the Competition Act Tribunal's about. Our QC, who's one of the top in the country, makes it clear that at the moment, if you're trying to run a case through the competition cases, he's looked at what's ahead, and he looked last year. He said it's about a 6-month run. You'd get a case in through 6 months. On a cat, you could get one in 3 to 4 months. Now, if the EPL decide that they're going to block it, or they're going to come with a technicality, or they're going to get thrown out, that obviously adds to time. And that's obviously, for me, the only way they'll go, because they haven't got a good case. But you then say it's highly unlikely it would happen before the club's own legal case. And we going, wow. So then nobody, Ben, knew the club was running a legal case. And when you put that in the tweet, the world said, holy hell, what's happening here? Ben Jacobs is talking about the club's legal case. You're saved, really, because the Premier League had made the mistake of mentioning the legal case in my letter. And that was the 4th point, which I didn't mention off the first part. They turned around to me and said very clearly that they would not expedite my case until the club's case ran first. But the club hadn't told anybody about running a legal case because they were told they couldn't under confidentiality rules. We went to the club and said, we've been told to queue behind you. We've been told you've got a case. They said, how have you been told that? And I said, in a letter. I showed the club the letter. The club were furious. The club then went and did their own statement. The club went on television that night and condemned the EPL for doing this. But the person who revealed that to the public was you in this tweet at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And you also, it says you also told NCSL would have to show a proposed resolution. I mean, the detail you've got in these tweets are incredible. And I'm saying tonight that you've had to see a letter or as you started off by saying, I've dealt with someone at the EPL, that person at the EPL must have had the letter in front of them when they were reading to you. Next bit you say is the good news, the Premier League are engaging with NCSL. Well, they'd have to, because by law I made them engage. When you go to court and you send letters to people, you go to their solicitors, they've got to engage, they don't have a choice. But the next significant step would need to be a court. Well, that was what we're after. Next tweet says, the key is whether NCSL will now take this to court and how they'll fund it. And then you put the most statement that upset us, Ben, because you put a letter before action doesn't cost anything. My bank manager says he wants you to get the money back for us, because a letter before action is somebody assessing all the evidence you've got and create a document that resembles the case you're going to fight. So the club have just done that to the Premier League, and they have listed the competition points they weren't happy with. And what I did in my letter before action, I mentioned the behind letter, and I mentioned collective lobbying, and I mentioned how they can't get away with that. So for you to put a statement out in writing, which I've still got, which says a letter before action doesn't cost very much. You're talking about a guy who's on £1,200 to £1,500 an hour, doing 40 to 50 hours, assessing a case and building a case up. I would say it's in the region of £40,000-50,000 to get to that point, because you've got to engage a team and you've got to get all the evidence collated, put a chronological order for that evidence, and then create a case before you can go. So, and the reason I bring this up is because some people say letter before action is £500, and they just don't know. They don't know competition law, but they don't know what they're talking about. So then it goes down to that. You come on and you say, PIF don't want to pay to be in the loop. Well, they never would be in the loop. PIF are on the loop because the club's case and argument and the fans' argument to prove that we can legally sell our club. What we're trying to do, Ben, is we're trying to sell our football club legitimately to a group of people that 97% of the fans in Newcastle have said we want to go with them. So why would PIF be in the loop? PIF are sitting there waiting for us to have a club to sell, then PIF will come forward. And it's at the end that tweet by saying it's because keeping a safe distance now and waiting for the club's legal case. And that's the legal case mentioned again. NCSL, it was Goodyear said, deserve huge credit for trying to get answers and is testament to their efforts. And you add at the end, just to add, the consortium's withdrawal helps the Premier League. And this is what I feel when I read your stuff. I think you're a good journalist in terms of writing stuff, but I don't know whether... I spoke to a journalist last week and he said, a journalist's duty, if somebody tells them it's raining outside, is to go outside and make sure it is raining and then write about it. And I don't know whether if the EPL, they've clearly given you my letter, or somebody in the EPL has clearly been in your ear and read the letter off to you. You, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the 17th, were the person who went bang, and the club find out, the club's people and legal team saw your tweets. And I spoke to them and they said, what's going on? And I sent them a letter, and I said, it's in the letter as well. He's reading from the letter. And then the club went their own route and kicked off. There was then a bit of a spat between them, and the EPL would blame me for releasing it. How the hell can I release this? Because up to now, I haven't said a word. All I've said is we've got a letter at 1 o'clock. At 2 o'clock, you've got this going out. So you had at the end say, ultimately, the club's case into the conduct of the O&D test needs to be determined. NCSL's challenge as an outside group is proven the withdrawal was orchestrated by the Premier League. It's a powerful narrative to allege. And I think back then, Ben, in November, it was a powerful thing to allege, but it's not so powerful now with the emergence of the ASL, the European Super League. Because since the European Super League's come on, boy, oh boy, the Premier League are in trouble. I tell you.
Can I just stop you there? Because obviously I don't want Ben to say, can you repeat the question?
We're out of time.
Good night. Thanks very much for
I've got 3 lines left, and there is a...
Go for it, mate. Go for it.
Right? So your last part of it says, it's a powerful narrative to allege, but harder to prove without official club consortium support. So what you were saying was, and for me, the EPL was saying, you tell him it's harder to prove he hasn't got the club and everyone's side. Well, of course I can get the club and everybody on side because we all want the same thing. All we want is things. So my question is dead simple is, that was released by you at 2 o'clock. I've got the letter that Liam Kennedy released at 5 o'clock, because I went public with it. We did an article in the Shields Gazette. So that's the significance. You were at 2 o'clock. I was at 5 o'clock. And I've been accused of leaking that story, but it was you that leaked it. My question is, who gave you that letter?
So at the end of that entire rant, you're basically asking a
journalist.
journalist.
It's not a rant.
And the problem is that with any journalist, nobody's going to sit here and tell you more than I've already revealed, which is that in this particular case, there was a Premier League source and I relayed that information. And from what I understand from what you've just started with, you're accepting that that information was accurate. You might disagree with some of the interpretations, but you're essentially saying that what I published as a journalist was accurate from, as I've written, a Premier League source. I've made no secret of that. And when I've spoken to sources on the buying side, or when I've spoken to other people, either directly or indirectly involved within the takeover, I've also tried to attribute them as well, because I believe as a journalist, when you strive for balance or when you're talking to one side, generally, you should be saying source X, even if that's just broadly attributed to an organization, rather than just the word sources, which is always a little bit vague. And of course, in this particular takeover's case, it's been very ever-changing and it's been complicated. So I agree with you when you talk about if it's raining outside, check by going and seeing whether you need the umbrella rather than just looking out the window. But that ultimately is what I try to do as a journalist with every single story that I approach. And you do that by realizing in the context of the Newcastle United takeover that there's two competing narratives, and that for a year and a half now, both sides have been guilty of leaking. Both sides have been guilty of putting their spin on things. And the narrative has consistently changed with ups and downs. So, of course, we've gone from it's an imminent takeover, which even I was told and I published, to it's a maybe takeover, to it's a withdrawal, to it's potentially back on, to it's going to have to be resolved through various legal means. And now we know that there's two legal means through which maybe the takeover will get over the line, or at least we'll get some clarity from. And I think the point at my end is that you started your précis by saying that you've got no agenda, but you do, as a Newcastle United fan, have an agenda. I'm not saying that an agenda is always negative in its connotations, but you're coming into it, you've said many times on Twitter, as somebody who is pro-takeover. I'm coming into it as someone that's a journalist. So, of course, the things that I relay may appear more negative, but that's just the nature of the beast, because if this takeover was positive, we wouldn't be a year and a half in without a takeover. So the overall story will always lean towards negativity, simply because of the time it's taken and the fact that you don't have a takeover. And I understand that you may think that I'm pro-Premier League, but if I have a source in the Premier League, which I've said openly and honestly every single time I've been asked, I'm going to use that source. But one thing I would add is that I've had many sources from Saudi Arabia and the Middle East and North Africa. I've had sources from the consortium as well. And again, when they've spoken to me, I've said very directly a buying source or a PIF source. And when they feed information, Newcastle United fans that want the takeover to happen don't seem to have a problem with that. But when the Premier League do exactly the same thing, or when a journalist just does his job and is able to dig out information, for some reason, if it goes against the narrative of the pro takeover, there's a problem with it. But when I come and say, for example, 6 months ago, that Dubai Media City now reporting alongside Saudi Media City and alongside the Saudi Intellectual Property Authority, so 3 different organizations, 2 in Saudi Arabia and 1 in the UAE, they're all saying that they believe that the actual purchase has taken place, not an agreement, the purchase itself. And I report that. And that was PR and that was a spin. And I said, I'm reporting that, but with a pinch of salt, to your point about if someone tells you it's raining, go outside and check. But when I did that, I was heralded. I was a hero. So I appreciate that we have different perspectives, and I certainly respect everything you've done. I also appreciate that you have a lot of questions for me, and I will try and answer them honestly and openly. But as a journalist, this isn't about what's your roots like, what's your affinity with the club like, what's your level of passion, what's your level of commitment. This for me is just about, I spent almost a decade in the Middle East and North Africa. During that time, yes, I worked for BN Sports, but before that, as Mitch will attest, I was in the UAE and I was traveling regularly to Saudi Arabia. And during that time, I was talking regularly to people like Yasser Al-Rumian and various other members of PIF. And I went to the launch of NEOM, which they partially sponsored. I went to the boxing events, which they partially sponsored. And Yasser Al-Rumian is still the president of the Saudi Golf Federation. And through that capacity, I went to the launch and his first 2 tournaments, and I interviewed him regularly on a vast array of different topics. So I come into this as somebody who understands the Middle East and North Africa, who understands the piracy backdrop, who understands the culture of that region. And I've got football contacts on the other side as well. And of course, I know Bean relatively well as well, hence why I get called Bean Jacobs. So I think all I'm trying to sort of start the conversation off by illustrating is that I'm trying to talk to sources on all sides. But if the takeover was solely positive, then it would have been done a long, long time ago.
Okay. So you've just said there, you've given a lot of your background, and you said we're going to ask you questions, you're going to answer them. Like, you've gone all the way around your CV there, and I respect it. But what I'm trying to do is get the question was very simple and short, and what I was trying to do is give the readers. There's a lot of people tuning into this tonight because they don't know about these tweets, and they don't know the relevance of these tweets to our case. And there's been a question between EPL and the club as to who leaked the story, and it was clearly you, because you were 2 o'clock and I was 5 o'clock. So. That's important to me, because that's the first time I came across you. I came across you because you were the guy that had my letter. It's the first time I've been able to talk to you. And all I've said to you is one quick question: who gave you my letter? I didn't, if you'd said a source, then I'll accept it. I accept that a journalist might want to protect his source. But you've said at the start, it's an EPL, it's give me the letter. I mean, you must have relatively decent EPL contacts to get a letter like that, because they'd dropped a massive goof by telling me and Gordon Steen at NCSL that they were taking action against the club, were taking action against them. I mean, that was sacrosanct that they couldn't come out. So for them then to give it to you, you're the only bloke they give it to. They didn't give it to any national journalist. They just give it to you. So somebody in the EPL gave that story to just you, and you broke it. So I'm saying you must have a hell of a contact. It must, it sounds like Masters and Hoffman to me, the way I'm listening to you, but maybe I'm wrong.
You're saying, first of all, repeatedly, that I was given the letter. That's not something that I ever published. That's not something that I've ever accepted. I was provided information from a Premier League source. I published exactly that, and you've said that information was accurate. You're now asking me, effectively, who is your source within the Premier League, and you will not find a journalist on the planet that will ever tell you their specific source.
And I accept that. I accept that you don't want to, and I'll move on from that. But I didn't say everything in the letter, everything you tweeted was accurate. You've put in there that the letter for action costs nothing. I mean, it's hugely inaccurate. But equally, I'm here as a fan, and you say to me, I've got an agenda. I've made it clear from the off. I'm here. I mean, there's a clue in the name. Newcastle Consortium Supporters Limited. I mean, it's not idly disguised, is it? So all I'm here is just for this consortium, nothing else. But when I watch,
the agenda is to get the takeover over the line. I'm not saying
I agree.
Negative, I'm saying come into the whole process with a pro takeover, pro Newcastle United agenda. Now, that's not a bad thing from the perspective of a fan. I've got huge respect for any fan that puts their time and energy and money into trying to get something over the line. However, there's a bigger picture here, and there's two sides. So my point is that a journalist will try, whether you agree with us or disagree with us, to talk to as many people as we can on as many sides as possible and give perspective. So if there's a legal question mark, we'll go to a legal expert. If there's a Saudi-based story, we'll try and get to PIF or someone within Saudi Arabia. If we can go to the club or the Premier League, we'll do that. And unfortunately, with the takeover over the last year and a half, the problem is when you go to one side, they tell you one thing. When you go to the other side, they tell you another thing. And to some extent, that's why you have to join the two sides together. And as a journalist, try and give a balanced perspective. Now, I accept and respect those that hear me and say, that's not balanced. You're pro EPL. That's not fair on Newcastle. But again, a lot of the information is still to come to light. And sometimes people like to jump the gun. So with, for example, the current situation now, you have two ongoing legal cases, the arbitration, which has been well publicized, and the club's anti-competition case. And there are different ways of looking at it. Some people will say this is Mike Ashley firing 2 bullets at the Premier League. Other people will say that Mike Ashley started an anti-competition case because he was fearful of losing the arbitration and wanted to do some digging, because the disclosure around the anti-competition is actually more important than the remedy at the end of the anti-competition. And again, I will put both those sides forward, and various people who want the takeover to happen will side with Newcastle are very strong. They're firing at the Premier League from 2 different guns. And other people will say, maybe, just maybe, Mike Ashley is fearful of losing. But I think the overriding thing I would say is that fundamentally, as a journalist, I am not sitting here wanting the takeover to either go through or to fail. I am following a story as a Middle East expert, as a broadcaster, and as an investigative journalist, talking to as many people as I possibly can, and where possible, relaying that. And I think, Keith, what a lot of people don't know about me is that I'm predominantly a broadcaster. So you find me on places like NBC, CBS, ESPN Plus. You see me commentating, you see me reacting to breaking news. And then when I write, it's investigative, which means that I put effort and time and energy digging into specific stories like BLQ that take months, if not years, to get all of the information, and then you publish. So you talked earlier about Liam holding a story. A lot of that is what I do as well. I hold, and then publish when the time is right in as much detail as possible. But Twitter allows you to fill in the bits in between. So, for example, you mentioned the ESL, and somehow you feel that that's going to help Newcastle United, but wait until next week, because I can assure you that Saudi money behind the ESL will be further proved. I can also assure you next week there's a story relating to Saudi Arabia and UEFA that is coming out that's going to be damning on the Saudi Arabian government and is not going to show the separation in a very good light either. And when I say that, of course, Newcastle United fans, even those on this call, will be saying, hang on a minute, lots of questions. And also, this is all turning very negative against the takeover. But in saying that, I'm not trying to pour cold water over the takeover. I'm trying to relay the reality. I know there's counter arguments. I know there's a lot of positivity within the club. I know that there's a huge amount of positivity within the consortium. And one of the biggest things to emphasize is PIF is still there. And if they were not confident, they wouldn't have hung around for this long. But unfortunately, there's been hurdles, and my job as a journalist is to some extent to draw light to those hurdles to make sure that as this story progresses, which is ever changing, the information is out there. And I know not a lot of Newcastle fans like it when there's negative news, but if journalists like Liam, if journalists like The Chronicle, if some of the international journalists like them or loathe them like myself, if we weren't also doing our job, much like you, Keith, then I'm not sure that there'd be the same momentum around the takeover, whether it happens or not. And I'm also not sure that as much information would have come to light. So to some extent, the villains can be the heroes and the heroes can prove to be the villains, but it's been kept in the public domain, which for those that want the takeover to happen, I think in the long run will benefit them. And had the media gone quiet, and had you as a fan gone quiet and sort of just given up on it, which is why I started by saying you do deserve huge amounts of credit, then I don't think we'd still be talking about even the possibility of a takeover.
Ben, did you get a copy of the BN Sports lobbying letter? Stu's asking there. Before I come to Mitch and Steve, I do want to get them involved.
Only what I've seen in the public domain. Nothing was sent to me from BN Sports. And on the BN Sports front, just briefly, because I know both mine and Keith's answers are taking up about an hour. So apologies to anyone that's got questions, but feel free to tweet me. I do always do my best to engage with Newcastle United fans. But on the BN front, what's interesting to me is that BN Sports were obviously very vocal. But I can tell you privately from talking to very senior people at BN Sports in May, June, July, and even beyond when the WTO report was revealed, they felt the takeover would go through. They were disappointed, they were disillusioned, and they were openly, both on and off record, in the dark, which doesn't quite fit with the same narrative as BN Sports kind of derailing things. So yes, I've read what's in the letters to both Richard Masters and to 19 of the 20 Premier League clubs, and I can confirm that that letter was sent to 19 of the 20 Premier League clubs, with, guess what, Newcastle United being the one that it wasn't sent to. But I only saw copies of them in the public domain. I was not sent any of those letters privately.
Can I just say something? I've come on the show tonight, and there's a lot of Newcastle fans want straight answers, and what I want to do is, Steve, I want to get Steve and Mitch to get involved here because we've got other things to go through. But we've listened to all that. We've gone to behind. We win, and you do talk and get a lot of content in, but some of it you talk about whether the Newcastle fans don't like what you say, and whether we as people you sort of making this suggestion that we aren't bright enough to look through good evidence and bad. It's what you say. It's the quantity, the way you say it. You said last week on Steve's show that it didn't make any difference if Boris Johnson had called it a cartel. So just let me quantify that. You've got a free run, and I'm going to do it in a couple of sentences. I went to a QC, a top competition QC, one of the best in the country, and I said, there's a reporter just turned around on a show and said that Boris Johnson calling this a cartel isn't of any relevance to the case. And he said bollocks. Now, that's privately to me, he said that. But what he's saying is, he said, I would even consider that to be worthy in an open speech, to run a case and say to the judge, Your Honour, this case isn't about whether there was a cartel or not. Our own Prime Minister is calling it a cartel. What we want to know is whether this cartel affected the takeover legitimately of Newcastle United. Then, on the same call, you compared what MBS was doing, lobbying Boris Johnson, saying it's shocking the way you've treated our country, with Behind Sports. Just so I can put in, because one thing I don't need to ask you this question, Ben. I don't think you've got competition experience. I don't think you understand very much about competition law. You can do, because Behind's letter is a collective lobbying letter that we can prove on our own at NCSL has gone out to several clubs, and it's gone out to the Premier League as well. Now, unless the Premier League have got a strong letter saying, I absolutely do not want to get involved in that, and every recipient's got the same letter, they're in trouble, and they will lose the competition case on collective lobbying. You can shake your head, but I think the person who was giving me the advice knows a lot more about competition law than you. You turned around and said that MBS, in asking Boris Johnson to look at it, was some kind of equal criminal act. I took that to the QC, and I took the competition law this week, and they said, what MBS is doing is totally legitimate to say that my country isn't being treated fairly or properly by one of your companies.
But that's the problem, and I emphasised that, Keith, on the last show. That
I listened to the last show. You never.
Lobbying towards the government, as you've just alluded to, is him saying on behalf of my government, at the same time as Newcastle United are trying to prove separation between the government and PIF, of which Mohammed bin Salman is the highest ranking member within PIF. So my question to you is, how, as a Newcastle United fan, if you believe PIF are totally separate from the Saudi Arabian government,
I do.
Comfortable with
I don't
MBS
I don't even believe MBS went to Boris Johnson. That's the first thing. I don't believe he even went. I think that's been put out there probably by the EPL. So I don't believe the MBS has lobbied Boris Johnson. What I did pick up, and what we've run through our legal team, is that Ben Jacobs goes on a Steve Ray show and says there's no difference between Behind Sports collectively. Listen, you've got to understand. You've got to let us put this point in. Behind Sports get billions of pounds and quote themselves as being one of the biggest financial supporters of the Premier League. They've got skin in the game, and if they go to companies, you've got to remember, 20 companies in the market, 6 of them making rules for the benefit of them 6, and 6 of them only being allowed to make those decisions against the 14. That's hugely illegal. When Behind Sports does a letter and says the words we put up last week, I strongly advise you, seriously, they're at it. We've got a letter in our possession where one of their legal people confirms that it's been sent out and confirms that letter exists. So
but the letter exists.
There's no way out of that letter. But MBS, if MBS, I don't think he did, but if MBS did go to Boris Johnson, there is nothing illegal about that. So when he says, but what you're going to understand, Ben, is, because if I let you in, I'm going to get 10 minutes. Wait, I want to finish my point to say, if you think that Behind's letter, collective lobbying, is equivalent to MBS having the word with Boris Johnson, There is no comparison in competition law. It's completely a red herring, and you put that in there. You're putting things in when you're talking, and you are putting a slant on lots of things. If you don't think Boris Johnson calling it a cartel isn't major, who's giving that advice? Have you got a competition QC and asked that? Because I have, and he says it's shocking, and he says it will come up in a case. You kind of get the biggest person. You kind of get the biggest person in British government calling something a cartel, and that being a good day for the EPL. Now the EPL might say you go and rubbish it when you go on the show, but there's no way that stands up.
There's a few things I'd like to respond to, though. So first of all, on the show, what I said was that there's lobbying from the inside out, which would be deemed illegal, and then there is lobbying from the outside in, which is vocal, but a little bit different. And when I compared the two, forgetting the anti-competition or the legal angle, what I said was that if PIF state they're not influenced by MBS, and if MBS goes to Boris Johnson, which he did, and Lord Lister as well, who's now resigned from his position, if MBS, independent of PIF and on behalf of his government, went to Boris Johnson, and if beIN went to the Premier League, both of which from the outside in, then there is a parallel in that sense of the lobbying. Of course, they're different scenarios, and I accept some of the points that you've made explaining that on the anti-competition front. But with beIN, one of the big things that you fail to realise is that all the information that beIN have put out there as regards piracy, as regards Saudi Arabia, has been in the public domain for 2.5 years. And the Premier League had formulated the same opinion. And I think what a lot of people don't realise is that beIN Sports were not adding anything new in their narrative. The Premier League had come to their own conclusions as regards piracy, as regards the Saudi Arabian government's links with PIF, long before beIN became a vocal presence. And they'd done that in evidence that they provided to the WTO. They'd done that via a report in the EU Commission. They'd done that via a co-commissioned report called Mark Monitor. They'd done that with frequency analysis specifically related to piracy in a report called the NAGRA report. And every single thing that beIN said has been on the BLQ website, which they put together, and has been released in various reports. So reiterating that in a letter is not a form of anti-competition from the outside in. And then with MBS, the problem is not to do with anti-competition. The problem is to do with the lobbying. So it doesn't matter what context MBS gets involved. And by the way, I fully appreciate if you argue it's just rumor. That's your opinion, and that's a fair opinion to have. And I respect that opinion. But my sources tell me the exact opposite. Lord Lister's office tells me the exact opposite. Boris Johnson's sources tell me the exact opposite, that MBS got directly involved. And I think the simple point is this. How is this takeover going to happen? Putting everything else that we disagree on out of the equation. How is this takeover going to happen? It's going to happen because Newcastle United win arbitration and prove that PIF is separate to the Saudi Arabian government, and MBS lobbying the British government in relation to the takeover in any capacity doesn't help prove separation.
You turned around on the show, you said, if arbitration runs second and Newcastle get a silver bullet, is what you said on the show, from the anti-competition case, that could help them win it. But if arbitration runs first, they might not win it. Did you say that or not?
No, I said disclosure coming in the weeks building up to arbitration, if it's released soon enough, may shed a light that has an influence on arbitration. But I said that arbitration is the pathway to completing the takeover. So arbitration is still, after all the different narratives and after all the different perspectives, and now with 2 cases, ultimately it will still come down to whether or not PIF can show separation from the Saudi Arabian government. So anybody wanting the layman's terms as to how this takeover is going to happen essentially has to hope that Newcastle United wins the arbitration. And if they lose the arbitration, you could see the anti-competition, if it drags on, as a secondary opportunity, because that does have an injunction facility within it that would, in theory, if Newcastle United are successful, allow the whole process to be revisited. But I also think, and when I talk to sources, they reiterate this, that if Newcastle United win arbitration, the anti-competition case will disappear very, very quickly.
Right, so you saying, I'll go back to it because it's much quicker and much shorter question to this. You say that if disclosure happens or doesn't happen, that'll have an impact on the arbitration.
It could have an impact.
You said on the show it will have an impact because you said that it will give a silver bullet that could help win if there was a silver bullet come out of the disclosure, it could help win the arbitration.
That's not what I said. I said that either Mike Ashley has no silver bullet and is hoping from the anti-competition that the disclosure gives him a silver bullet, or Mike Ashley has two silver bullets, one in the arbitration, and he's doubling down in the anti-competition case. So if the disclosure backs up that second theory, then suddenly as arbitration starts, or maybe in the weeks leading up to the panel making a decision, something might come out that helps Newcastle United. But I can't tell you that definitively because we haven't seen the disclosure yet.
So if there was a bullet, just let's not do the long-winded answers. If there was a bullet came out,
well, they're not long-winded answers. It's detail which you lack at times because you spuriously
let's go back
detail and perspective.
I've got more fact and detail than you have because I understand the competition law.
Like when, for example, you wrote a letter to Boris Johnson referring to an Eldridge bid for Tottenham Hotspur that you got off a message board. Like that's the kind of fact that you've got.
Okay then. There's three people on the panel here. Just before you put comments out like that, the Eldridge investments, which I put in there,
which was Todd Bowley trying to buy the club before bidding for Chelsea.
Can you just finish? Can you three lads confirm whether the Eldridge investments were involved with the Tottenham Hotspur, and did we ever hear anything back contradicting what we put out? Steve?
No, we didn't.
Well, it was denied by Tottenham, and it was denied by Todd Bowley, who then went on to try and buy.
Can I just tell you? It wasn't denied by Tottenham. Nobody got in touch with us. It's on Tottenham's website now. What we've put on. So instead of putting in, because you've said you say it, listen to these three. These three all know the same information. Is it right, that information about Eldridge investments trying to buy Tottenham Hotspur?
According to the sources that we've had, yes.
Exactly. Well, it's about sources. It's about sources again, isn't it? That's what it's about.
Well, yeah, and I think that's quite relevant here tonight, and something that's fueled the schism that exists within the fan base over this whole thing, and why they get so much passion and so much stuff thrown around. It's a little different for us four because we're not journalists. I'm just an overweight gobshite dentist in the Middle East. But as Ben would attest, the Middle East is a village, and I'm now, after listening to Ben tonight, I'm convinced some of the people he's speaking to are some of the people who are kind enough to talk to me on occasion, because the degrees of separation in this part of the world are far less than back in the UK, and I think Ben would agree with that too. You know, we've got mutual acquaintances dotted all over the Middle East. It's great, it's crazy, and I don't think that would be the same in the UK, but that's the way it works over here. But it's also why people come and talk to us, because we protect our sources too. It'll all come out one day about who's been talking to who and who's been talking about what in the middle of all of this. And some of that will increase some people's credibility, and some of that will blow some people's credibility out of the water. I'm quite sure of that too. But it's because we look after the sources and where we get the information from. What Steve Hasty and I have done in the past, when we leak the odd name out and chuck the odd hint around, it's because we've been told we can. And that's usually because it's years after something that we've been involved in. Like, for example, you know, the whole Canadian stuff that happened twice. And, you know, when we drop that in one day, everybody's like, hey, what? You know, I can back Ben up on something he said tonight as well about being at one point being confident that actually the takeover was going to go through when they were totally gutted. And that's what was reaching my ears from people at being. And I think we discussed it on the show actually as well, around about that time as well, because I think we brought it up, you know, and I think we need more open and robust debate like this within the fan base with the horrible vitriol that goes on with it, that allows people to get away with downright bad behaviour and chucking stuff around that's not needed and not necessary. We all want the best for the club. We, as I said last week, I think, you know, about the thing that guts me the most is not just the investment in the club, but the investment in the region that would come with it. And it's quite plain from speaking to people in and around PIF and around PCP and around everybody involved in the bid, that there's a bigger thing than the football club at stake here, and that's the thing that pulls at my heart the most. To see the region in a time when we're probably now going to lose out on more things like money from Europe, thanks to Brexit and things like that. Because you've got to remember, a lot of our city was rebuilt with money from Brussels, not from London. And so it's the kind of thing we desperately need. And we need to be able to have these discussions and debates openly and robustly without it becoming nasty, you know?
I don't think this is coming nasty, but I think
no, it hasn't. That's exactly what I'm saying, Keith.
Well.
That's exactly what I'm saying, Keith. But in other parts of our fan base, it doesn't happen civilly.
What do you do then? What do you do then if Ben's on a show and he's saying to people, as you said again tonight, that he thinks MBS lobbying Johnson, which you know.
Well, look,
but let's just finish his point. If he thinks that is no different to behind lobbying clubs to block the takeover, but a competition QC and a competition lawyer says it absolutely does. What do you do? Because the problem is when fans get all this, you know, Ben's tweets, and when they get him on you know, going on a talk, fans are misled. And what I want to put over is that I've spoken to QC this week, and I've spoken to a competition lawyer who I've spent over 7 figures with in a year. So I haven't just sort of picked the phone up and talked to someone. And I'm not talking, when you say it's a source, I'll tell you the source, that's the difference. Factually, tell you that they say there is no comparison in competition law with MBS talking to Boris Johnson about anything. And you see, the thing is, MBS isn't even part of this. This is PIF. The whole case is about PIF being separated from Saudi government. It's not about, they keep throwing this MBS red herring in, and I tell you, it doesn't frustrate you, because I think people do it to sicken the fans and to make out the case is worse than what it is.
Look,
It's not a red herring though, because if that guy is separation, then
separation isn't between MBS. Separation is between Saudi state and PIF.
Who do you think controls the Saudi state, though, on a day-on-day basis? Mohammed bin Salman is the de facto leader. The whole problem of PIF's structure in practical terms is that MBS has autonomy over that. The money for the Newcastle United takeover, the money for the Newcastle United takeover comes from the Saudi central bank. So what a lot of people don't realise is that in May, just as the deal was, in inverted commas, imminent, PIF received trillions of dollars from the Saudi central bank, which is the government bank. So where do you think the 300 million is coming from to complete the potential Newcastle United acquisition? MBS's role is vital because he's the one that links PIF and the Saudi Arabian government. And the second thing to briefly state is that as regards beIN versus MBS in the context of, loosely speaking, lobbying, my point again is that anything MBS does that shows a lack of separation is essentially bad for the Newcastle United takeover. And then as regards beIN, there's no real relevance to Newcastle United's case because Mike Ashley is arguing different to your case. And this is my question to you, that you've always said that you effectively did an anti-competition case, and I congratulate you for that passion, and I respect your opinion, and I respect your hard work, and I know that it's been tough, and I know that you've reached into your own pocket, and I've got the utmost respect for that, because I've not got an anti-you or anti-Newcastle agenda, but you're making out to some extent like legally you've done the legwork, you've handed it over to Newcastle United, and now they've taken over your case. But they are two different cases in the same area with, yes, some overlap of information. But I don't believe that they're identical cases. And I also don't believe that the legwork you've done is being directly used by the club, because you're saying that you had standing because speculatively the new consortium were going to refund season.
You've got on 4 subjects up now, Ben. You're bouncing around.
I'm not bouncing around. I'm saying your case was legally different.
How do you want to answer that? How do you want to answer that? If you just stopped there and said that you've said that my case isn't that, let us tell you something factually, right? The club did not have a competition case till they met me. Okay, so when you say, oh, you're going around saying this, I'm saying nothing. I'm saying that Keith Patterson and Gordon Stein ran a competition case, and we were the people that brought the word competition to Newcastle United. There's nobody went down the competition route until we sat with the club, and they didn't have a competition team. So what I'm saying is, please don't be insulting and say what we haven't done when we know what we have done. and we spent money and time doing that. But what you're doing is you're bouncing on a subject, then you go into behind, then you go into this. You've done behind, my case, my stand, and you're all over. Slow down. Let people in and do a subject at a time.
Steve Hasty,
what's your take? Slow people down.
What's your take on what you've heard in this? I would say explosive first hour, because listen, both guys are very good at talking. Both guys are very knowledgeable. Both guys have got good sources. And look, we know the situation. We've been dealing with this for 12 months ourselves. But I found that thoroughly entertaining. And I know one or two people in the chat haven't, but most people are as engrossed as me, you, and Mitch. What's your take on what you've heard from both sides?
Well, it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating, because we've got passionate people, and Newcastle's a passionate place, and we've heard that phrase used many, many times in the past. But it to me, there's the semantics. The semantics fly all over the whole takeover, and have done for what, 18 months, 2 years, if not longer now. And I understand exactly where, from a reporter's point of view, where Ben's coming from. He's sources, etc. It's fascinating. This divide is also a very relevant point, but also more relevant is competition law. And from what my understanding, and from talking to Keith and talking to other people, exactly what competition law is, the way that you put things together doesn't necessarily mean that just because there's a narrative that somebody X, Y, and Z does that gets disregarded, because in competition law there are strict lines of demarcation that don't cross over. And I feel as though we're now into a semantic war. We're into a yes, but he does this, and my dad's bigger than your dad. He's the de facto ruler. We've heard that many, many times over many, many months, and the whole nitty-gritty comes down to, in competition law, are you allowed to lobby in the manner that has happened?
No, you're not. No, you're not.
Exactly. Well, that's my understanding, and I'm not. I don't want people to think that I'm taking my understanding from just a conversation with you, Keith, because it's not. I've done my own independent research to see what lobbying is, and I've come to the same conclusion as you. And I suppose in a Newcastle United sense, that's a positive, because I would have hated to have felt as though we're going to get because there's a lot going on in football. There's a lot going on the periphery, and I feel as though that we are being used as a punch bag. Newcastle United, Newcastle fans, the takeover is being used as a punch bag to sort out an awful lot of other problems that are involved in football. And Neil and I know, we've covered this. There are the Man City. Everybody throws Man City into the equation, and they go, yeah, but that happened in 2008. They throw the lobbying, or they throw the ridiculous things that we've seen about just today, an article about Gazprom and this type of thing, and the way that they've and somebody said that this is a gas v oil Champions League game that's taken place, etc., etc. And again, it becomes politics. It becomes economics. It becomes something. I thought the Champions League was Man City v Chelsea, but apparently it's not. It's gas v oil. It's finance. It's power. It's organisation. From it. You Ben, you support what is now everybody's favourite football club. I thought it was my favourite football club a couple of weeks ago. A couple of years ago.
Well done, Leicester.
Yeah. Back in the 90s, everybody's second club was Newcastle United. Now everybody's second club is Leicester. But I read an article during the week that completely surprised me about Leicester owners, and I was flabbergasted to hear that the Leicester owners are very, very political in Thailand, and that they back a certain organisation in Thailand, a certain political party. That certain political party does certain things that other people are being persecuted for, etc., etc. And this shows you that the whole geopolitics, the whole position, it's a murky world, and I just feel as though we've gone away from the main topic, which was, can Newcastle United be bought by a public investment fund. And do we need to worry about who owns that public investment fund? It's the people of Saudi Arabia. It's very similar to, in layman's terms, to the Crown Estates in the UK, and where the Crown Estates exists to put finance into the coffers of the government, into the people. And it's this word state. I mean, if we wanted to dig around, we could go into British Constitution. We could talk about all sorts of fancy things about what the state is as compared to what the government is, what the Prime Minister is, what the Queen is, what the royal family is, what the Church of England is. We could go on forever. When we're just, this is a simple thing. This is a football club that we want to be bought and we want to benefit from, and from a simple Newcastle United point of view, we feel as though that we're being dragged through all sorts of crazy stuff.
As a fan base, we've been put through all sorts, and we've also been almost made be held forward as the arbiters of morality in sport, which is ridiculous. We just want to turn up and support a football team at the weekend. The point Steve makes about Leicester City owners, for example, if they were from a Gulf state, I'm quite sure there'd have been a hell of a lot more said, because there seems to be this geopolitical bias against all Gulf states at the minute in the media, particularly in certain parts of Europe at the moment. Dubai's getting a bashing off the Daily Mail constantly. Qatar's getting a bashing off of certain areas ahead of the World Cup. There's all sorts goes on, and it's this whole geopolitical world that we seem to have been shoved front and centre of, when all we want to do is watch off a bloody football team and try and get it out of the hands of Mike Ashley. Who it must be said has, now proven he's invested nothing of his own money in the club for 10 years. And we've had 7 million capex over 10 years, which is ridiculous for any football club, let alone one such as ours. Not to say that we're particularly special or anything, but dear me, we need to have a bit more investment than, say, Sheffield United, who've just been relegated, for God's sakes. And it's really difficult. Again, it comes back to sources, the same sources or different sources that say MBS was lobbying the Prime Minister. The Saudi sources, and certainly two I spoke to Arab News, categorically denied it on the behalf of PIF. Absolutely categorically denied it. And so where do you go with that? He says black, the other one says white, and you trust your sources, and you run with your sources, and you run with what you said.
And I think, Mitch, to that point, when you speak to any one side, you get a strong, fervent narrative. And then when you add it all up, it doesn't always make sense. And the disclosure is going to be very interesting to see. We
got hammered for being too positives on occasion.
Yeah.
But when we're speaking to people who are entirely positive all the way through, what else are we going to say?
No,
what else is anybody going to say? And you're right.
I want to emphasize again that there's a lot of different components to this potential takeover. And when you actually remove the subplots and the politics, it still comes back to separation during the arbitration. And then as regards the anti-competition, how that as a case develops rather than the disclosure aspect will be determined by the award of the arbitration, which is likely to be final unless the law's actually been interpreted wrong. There's very limited grounds for appeal. Now, there's the murky side, and there's Keith's, in inverted commas, cartel, and there's the so-called Big Six, and there's lots of other debates. But fundamentally, and I've said this many times, and this is my perspective from talking to various sources, why do the Premier League want PIF to be connected to the Saudi government? The answer is because that's their easiest way legally of tying PIF to piracy. And ultimately, that's a murky subplot that's been around, as we all know. And I know that the consortium would say, well, it was resolved or it's not a big factor. But it is if the Premier League connect PIF to the Saudi state, because they've already connected the Saudi state to piracy, it becomes a big issue. So I still think, and this is only my opinion, that the whole premise, and I get that this might be too high for Newcastle to be involved in. I get it might be too political for Newcastle to be involved in. I fully appreciate that argument. And I know why the fans believe that it's too big a picture. This is PIF, this is a takeover, get it done. I totally accept that theory. But the flip side for balance is the Premier League feel they are selling to a group that were behind stealing their rights. And I can also appreciate that side of the argument as well.
Where do you stand, Ben? Sorry, Steve, on what's happening in Saudi regarding the piracy moves they're making? They've now got 240 odd IP laws now written into Saudi law. From my understanding, you can now get Saudi subscriptions to beIN Sports, but the payments aren't always going through, and it's not clear who's blocking it, whether it's beIN blocking it or whether it's the Saudi banks blocking it. And the things seem to be aligned for that to change, because let's be honest, beIN have overpaid effectively for the rights this time round, and there's a hell of a lot of potential subscribers that'll make up the money that they have lost over the last few years. So it's a win-win situation for everybody. And as we know in the Middle East, everybody wants to walk away from the table saying we won. Nobody wants to lose face. Everybody wants to walk away and say. So do you see these moves they are making? Because I don't see them directly linked to the takeover per se. I think we're just a little boat in the middle of the hurricane, being tossed around left, right, and centre. But I also see ducks being put in a row, that once somebody says, right, let's get this done, bang, a button will be pushed and everything will happen and everything will be done.
I think there's been progress, obviously, since the blockade got lifted in January. We've definitely seen a softening of the political relations, which have bled down to more access to beIN Sports. It's important to note that the beIN signals were never disrupted. So as you say, it was always a question of, would your purchase go through? And then the next step would be for beIN's license to be official. And when it's official, it can then actually be sold in stores and have a visual presence. But more importantly, let's say for the Euros in a few weeks' time, you could also watch it online, and that online link is still blocked. And it's being left blocked until all the different court cases are resolved. And part of the blockade agreement was supposed to be the dropping of court cases between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So you've got Saudi Arabia's appeal against the WTO report, which is still filed, but probably will be dropped. And then you've got beIN Sports' damages case against BLQ. And I suspect that Saudi Arabia are wanting beIN to drop their damages case against BLQ, and then beIN will be formally restored. But it's
complicated first, isn't it?
But it's complicated by the fact that, watch this space, because next week there will be another twist that I'm aware of, that I've seen documentation of, and it's going to involve UEFA piracy and Saudi Arabia. And in layman's terms, the tender that UEFA have out for Euros and for Champions Leagues says very specifically they do not have to sell to the highest bidder anymore in a public tender. And my understanding is that UEFA and Saudi Arabia's relations are at an all-time low, and that UEFA will not do any further business with Saudi Arabia, who remain on the watch list. So that's a bit problematic, because everything with beIN and Saudi is kind of moving in the right direction and could be good for the Newcastle takeover, especially if it goes through. It's going to be great for the Newcastle United takeover because you want to watch games in Saudi Arabia. But wait until next week. There's going to be another negative twist, and there's going to be another major organization in UEFA that question the credibility of Saudi Arabia, the government specifically. So again, Newcastle fans are right to be screaming as I talk now and say, but what's this got to do with PIF? And I suppose the short answer is just on the PIF board sits the media minister and the Premier League's main point of contact throughout BLQ. He's not directly involved in the takeover, but he's on the PIF board. So there's a slight link. I understand it from both sides, but the piracy issue is still very live, and in my opinion anyway, very relevant to the Newcastle United takeover.
So right, guys, I've got 45 minutes left of the show, so I have got a few things that I've got to get through. We'll come back to this, so hold that thought, Keith. I've got to thank our sponsors first and foremost. Over 1,000 people watching again tonight, which is becoming part of the course on a Friday, but we never take it for granted, so thank you very much for tuning in. Big thank you to Spider VPN for all your internet safety issues. Google Spider VPN, and they will be top of the Google search, and you will find their website. protect your passwords and other things on your computer by Googling Spider VPN. Big shout out to skipsandbins.com, telephone 0800 25 45 25 3, email inquiries at skipsandbins.com, website www.skipsandbins.com, easy contract, free and pay as you go, waste collection. And there's Sir Bobby. He will be making another appearance in the top of the screen very shortly. You'll notice we've got our sponsors' logos up there these days, and rightly so. They've been a big help to us going through the last 12 months. Also, a big shout out to John, who is in the chat from qtechshop.co.uk, makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wallsend in Newcastle, and John at Jab Signature, who makes our flyers. If you're a first-time visitor to the channel, please subscribe. Hit the Newcastle Legends logo in the bottom right-hand corner on the screen, and that's it. You've subscribed for free. All of our programs are free. No, we are not going to start charging for them, as some people have asked tonight. Please hit the thumb up and click the like button. That does help us massively. Please click share it to your social media, your Twitter, your Facebook, your LinkedIn, whatever, and join the chat. Apologies to everybody wanting to ask questions tonight. It's virtually impossible because it's such a good debate. We will try and get to one or two if possible. And don't forget, the NUFC fans, foodbank.co.uk match day bucket is operational throughout the summer. Big time to help the food bank now, folks. Please, 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 please keep donating. And of course, you will end up getting yourself into the draw for the NCSL watch. 5th of August, I think that is going to be drawn on. I'm going to do the question that we do throughout each week, which builds up to a clue. I'm going to do that now in case I forget. So your clues over the last few weeks, and this is to win some NUFC Matters goodies, was Roland's Gill, Crooktown. I hope I haven't lost one yet. 1962 to 1975, 389 appearances. So you should have had all these wrote down from the previous week. And tonight's clue is this, and this finishes it off. The person suggested in the clues managed Manchester City, but between which years? Ooh. So John is in the chat. He'll be keeping an eye out for the answer. He will tell us who the correct answer is. Send it to WhatsApp, and I will announce the winner in due course. We also have some mugs to give away. Now, we've got questions, I believe. I think Mitch, Steve Hasty, and Keith have all got questions. I'm going to give mine away. Now, these are one-offs, 4 one-offs for the Fab Four tonight. NUFC Matters mugs. Dodo Bird, for your kind donation to the team, I'm going to give you my cup for free.
Nice one, Steve.
You don't have to answer anything. So that cup will be going to you, number one. I'll get your address. I've got your email address, so I will send you that. Okay, Keith, your question, please. And it's the first answer for the mug. It's the first answer in the chat wins Keith's mug. So go for it, mate.
Okay. Thinking of royal families. The question is simple. To do with football. Who was the last member of the royal family ever to play professional football at full level for England?
Oh.
Okay, John has the answer. So we'll recap these at the end of the show. Mitch, your question for your mug.
I went with a Liverpool theme because of the Fab Four. So, excluding friendlies, how many games have Newcastle United played competitively against Liverpool?
Okay, ask that again.
Excluding friendlies, how many games competitively have Newcastle United played against Liverpool?
All right, so if you stick your answer in the chat, folks, that's a chance to win another mug. And last but by no means least, Steve Hasty, your question.
Right, my question is, what was the last song the Beatles ever played live together?
It had to be music with you, Steve, didn't it? Okay.
Yeah, Beatles.
And the Beatles, of course. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so stick the answers to those questions in the chat and the ones to the monthly one as well. John, you've got your work cut out, mate, because we're having to cram it all into the last 30 minutes of the show. But that's just the way it goes when we have such a great debate. And honestly, in case I forget at the end as well, I just want to thank Ben and Keith for this, because honestly, I know you're part of the team now, Keith, but Ben, superb, because it's about debate. And I think what I wanted people to come away from this was It's about having healthy debate, and we can't have healthy debate when we have different ideas, different philosophies, different contacts. Well done, lads. Honestly, it's fascinating listening to both of you.
I was going to suggest a mass debate, but after last week,
no. If anybody's wondering why he's suggesting a mass debate, it's because when he's on the programme, he does tend to walk around like this, which was a tweet that I got sent. Far from sexy beast. I even managed to get the photo of you actually doing the bum, the pulling of the kegs at the back. But that was great.
It's all right. I've got pants on tonight and they're staying on. The boys are back in the barracks.
It's so long that we're past the watershed now.
Exactly. Okay, and Julie, I would never miss this out, Julie. Don't worry. Troll of the week, Julie's favourite. I know you're watching. Look, this is a bit different. I did have one. I think people are getting sick of seeing me being called this, that, and the other on here, and I get it all the time. So I did have a different one, but I've gone for a completely different angle, and it's a humorous one. It's got to be honest. Those of you who watched Sunderland's demise again in the playoffs, not even reaching the final this year, will have noticed that. The fans went round to the side of the ground again and started remonstrating with not only the players but the manager. And Mitch took great delight in sending me this off the message board from Sunderland. All or Nothing says, possibly a mag rent mob. People are asking who on earth were the people having a pop at the manager and the players. This photo then goes up, or video, shall I say, SAFC. Okay, Baz Fisher says he puts like a pair of eyes and hashtag SAFC. And then Moneyball says it looked like a couple looked like Reverend Steve Wraith or Gateshead fans. What on earth would I be doing at Sunderland, for God's sake?
It's because, Steve, it's always your fault. It's always you.
And that's where it came from. So it is a slightly different Troll of the Week, but deserved so. He's Troll of the Week. Thanks. And we're going to cram it. We're going to have to cram the Toon Tipster in as well, because I've got a feeling once Keith and Ben start again, we're not getting finished. Now I'm definitely cutting off at 29 minutes past 7 because Ben's got to go out and get a train, and I've got to go and have a few pints. So we're going to have this now. That'll be me dancing at about 10:30 tonight. I'll get my white gloves on. Okay, Joe Walker, thank you, mate. Rushing back from work to do this. He goes, evening amigos and Ben and the NUFC Matters family. He says, well, it's nice to look at the book this week without having to scroll 3 pages to find a price for Joe Linton to score. He says, this week we're looking at 2 huge games. Firstly, the big one, the Championship playoff final, where Brentford are much fancied at 5-6, with Swansea at a decent 7-2, just over double your money for the draw after 90 minutes. 10-1 for either team to win on the dreaded penalties. 6-4 for over 2.5 goals, and 8-15 if you think it'll be under. He says his money might just go on the Swans. As for All England Champions League final, a similar book is running, with City being fancied at the tune of 17-20, with Chelsea also a decent 7-2, just over 2-1 for the draw in 90 minutes. 10-1 for City to win on penalties, 11-1 for Chelsea. Goals are fancied 6-5 for the over 2.5 book. Evens for both teams to score. Sergio Aguero is the favourite to sign off at City with an anytime goal at 7-5. Kevin De Bruyne 11-5 also looks good. Giroud favourite to score for the pensioners at 11-5, and Werner 3-1. The All London double will get you just over 7-1. City Swansea double the same. City Brentford 2-1, and Chelsea Swansea 19-1. Surely worth a fiver for the food bank. Gamble safe and have a wonderful bank holiday weekend, says Joe. God, I just love that music. It gets us in a good mood. That's like my. Everybody seems to like Troll of the Week, but I do like that one. Okay, next up. Normally, Ben, we'll do these all throughout the show, but we just haven't had time today. So we're going to whiz through these. This one was sent
with the buggers again.
This one was sent to me.
You've had a Stephen Merchant lookalike on the show for the last hour and a half, so that kind of covers this section, doesn't it?
Well, I thought this one was brilliant. There's Mitch and Ray Winston.
Fantastic. That's fantastic.
I mean, those glasses aren't drawn on either. That is a genuine photograph of you, Mitch. So
it is, absolutely.
And I can't remember who sent us these, but this one's brilliant as well.
Oh, Christ,
mate. We still haven't had William Hartnell as Doctor Who, but it's coming. Oh my God, unbelievable! It's really good. Well done, well done. Look, thank you for sending them in. I just got the pictures, but I didn't know who they were. We got this one. Gareth Vardy, of course, our sponsor from Spider VPN.
I was after me day at the water park. My hair was all over the place.
Yeah, I mean that is uncanny. Ugly Camel sent this one. Steve Hasty and the Mother from Pink Floyd's The Wall. You'll never listen to that album again, will you, Steve?
No, I never will. Never have, never will.
And then this one, Chaz from Morph and John Joe Shelby. You even got the hand in, which is very good. Keith Patterson didn't escape.
Oh Christ! Oh, John, man.
Johnny, that's a belter, mate. That is a belter. And I got sent this one. I got sent this one as well. Alan Shearer and that guy from some kind of Edwardian days. It's a classic.
It's close, mate, isn't it?
This Ben didn't escape either. This was after me and Ben were on last week. Good watch, Ben Jacobs and Steve Wraith. That's uncanny, Ben. Me and you. Very good. I then got sent that.
Next time.
Seeing as though I haven't takeover stuff, we had to have hairy hands on. That was quite good. Hairy hands and I don't know whether that's some guy off Planet of the Apes or something, but very good, very good, very good. Thank you for that, Tim Cairns. And I did have one, which I keep saying, I keep forgetting and keep missing, which is further. If I scroll further up, I always miss it. There it is. Newcastle. That was Miguel Almiron and the kid from the In-Betweeners, which is what I got sent about 10 months ago. But very good. that is an uncanny likeness. But that's great stuff. Keep them coming in. Keep tweeting them. We'll pick up as many as we can. Some absolute belters. Thank you very much for them. But that is all for. And I had to steal Steve Hasty's thunder a little bit for Tweet of the Week this week because of what happened last week. So, it wouldn't be a Newcastle United podcast if we couldn't laugh at Sunderland. And boy, have they given us some laughs over the last few years. 6 in a row. Yep, 6 years out the Premier League, that's for certain. But some of the tweets this week have been absolutely superb. Pizza champs. That guy's face, dear me, how it's a classic. Then we had this one from Chris Little. Checking how the Mackhams are doing in the playoffs. That much used photograph of Leonardo DiCaprio certainly made everybody laugh this week. Then we had this one. Absolutely glorious after all the shite we were reading in February, and it's all ended with a slice of pizza which they can defend next season. And this one from Ferry Hill Mags. Hey, yeah, you with a sad face, come up to my place and live it up. You beside the dance floor, what do you cry for? Let's live it up. That Sunderland fan in the onesie. Fantastic stuff.
The league onesie.
Yeah, it's a league onesie. And big shout out to Robbo as well, who apparently choked on his tea. Oh no, choked on his snake bite because he was on the telly last week. But that's drifted into the tweets of the week. But brilliant stuff. Great. Keep them coming in. Steve Hasty, back to normal service with you next week. Last thing from me before we have the last half hour handed over to takeover stuff and chat between Ben and Keith again, because the rest of us can't get a word in edgeways, is the T-shirt for the food bank. Please, please, please bid for this T-shirt. It's on my Twitter account, @Steve Wraith. It's a Steve Hasty T-shirt. The Confessions of a Geordie. Get a bid in, whatever it is. I think the first bid will probably win, because I don't think there's been a great deal of interest, because I haven't plugged it enough this week. But please bid. Don't let Steve Hasty on the shelf. Get a bid in, and we will put another one up next week. So that is that. And I think I crammed everything in about 14 minutes there, lads. So I did well. So
fantastic.
Half an hour to go. I can drink some water. Ben, I'm going to give you something to you ask Keith a question. He's asked all the questions. You ask him a question if you want.
Well, I think, Keith, first of all, I'm really enjoying the debate, because it's important that we're respectful and we engage in this. And fundamentally, at my end, I want to see Newcastle United succeed as a football club. So we disagree on certain things, but there's a lot of respect there for both yourself, but also the football club and the fan base at large. And I think that my question to you is your sense from an anti-competition point of view, even though, of course, the case is now being overseen by the football club, on specifically the withdrawal by PIF, at least in public. So obviously, I think everyone knows the two arguments, that PIF and the wider consortium feel that they were pushed out, and they made that public statement, but it was a little bit disingenuous at the time. And then obviously a law court may say, well, if we buy that, and the Premier League might argue that genuinely the consortium did just withdraw, the only way of countering that is to show categorically that the Premier League dragged their heels. So how confident are you, from the information that you've seen, that it will be easy to offset that very public and on-record withdrawal from the consortium group?
I don't think the withdrawal by PIF will come into anti-competition, because if you leave a case and the reason you put forward was you were working in an anti-competitive marketplace, I don't think that pulling out will go against the football club or PIF. Reason being, if you've been badly treated, you are allowed to pull out because you say, I can't take any more, which is what they're saying. PIF didn't pull out in the sense they're still there waiting to buy the club, but what they did was they pulled out and made that statement. The statement is a nothing statement, but as far I think what you're asking is, if there is a cartel in place, as Boris Johnson says there is, Ben, right? If a cartel exists, right, and there are several arguments that we put to the Premier League in our letter, which they didn't answer. They didn't answer any of them. Steve Hasey's got one of them. He's got the letter. They said the Cheer 1 year letter answered the behind letter.
Yeah.
Just so you understand, Ben, our QC, who was one of the top ones, says you will win the case just on the behind letter. And I don't want to debate it because we haven't got time. But and I'll happily debate it offline with you. We'll do it friendly, like we said. But he says that that's enough to win a case. And when you said earlier, has Mike actually got any silver bullets, or can he find a silver bullet? We think there's at least 4 there now with us. And then the club have got some more evidence. And there's things that you don't know about, where the Saudis offered more information and were told there was enough. And that's significant, because if I'm vetting you for separation or anything else, and I say, Ben, that's enough, that signifies that I've got enough for your argument. I don't need any more to strengthen your argument. But when I say I don't need any more, and then I vote against it, that's disingenuous. That will go against them in court. So as far as PIF pulling out, that would only have any substance if they weren't acting anti-competitively. But if the Prime Minister says it's a cartel, they only have to prove 1 point of a cartel, and they will do that. They'll do that on that behind letter, which you don't think has much status. What I want to do is just to say to you is just in a one-word answer, have you got competitional experience? Like, I'm not being funny. Have you spent much time in competition or not? Because you understand arbitration. I'm wondering if you've done much on that. Yes or no?
Well, I mean, with any aspect, including anti-competition, I also speak to a range of lawyers to get the perspective.
Have you worked on a competition case?
Well, of course, I'm a journalist, so I haven't worked myself on an anti-competition case. But whenever you ask a question you don't know the answer to as a journalist, you go to the relevant source. So I've spoken to a variety of lawyers on the anti-competition front. And I think that the point that I would relay on the anti-competition is, again, that your case and the club's case are not focused on exactly the same points. You were deemed to have no standing. I know you disagree with that, and you've given your reasons why, and you said that there is financial damage to you and the rest of the fans. You're on record as saying things like season tickets would have been refunded. So I get that. And like you say, we've not got time to debate that. But Mike Ashley, on the anti-competition front, forgetting disclosure, which I think is the main tactic in relation to arbitration, but if it runs its full course, Mike Ashley won't necessarily be arguing about a Bean letter and lobbying. Mike Ashley will be arguing that due to the delay, which he believes is intentional and the Premier League don't, the price of his football club has dropped. Now, if he gets the full 300 million, it might not be an issue, but how do we know behind the scenes? I'm certainly getting intimations that now Newcastle's been valued at about 190 million as a Premier League club. That might mean the price changes and Ashley might have to fight for that kind of compensation. So I get that there's overlap, but I don't believe, you may disagree, that your case and the case that Newcastle are trying are in any way, shape or form identical, more specifically because you did not have standing in the Premier League's eyes. I understand you disagree with that, but the Premier League do believe that Newcastle United have standing, and they're arguing slightly different angles in the same area.
The standing doesn't when you take an anti-competition case and you're going against arguments of how you've acted anti-competitively, it doesn't matter once the standing's put aside. So if I've got 5 arguments and I give them the club and they run 7 arguments, the standing's gone, because once they say they've got standing, that's standing finished with it. That standing is a qualification of whether you can run the action. The QCs and the legal team have been watching tonight. They've texted and said that even when you bring up things like ESL and what's going to come out next week, they said that's an irrelevance to a judge deciding on arbitration as to whether arbitration is going to decide separation or not. So separation is going to come forward, and it's going to be decided. Is the separation between state and PIF, and whether the ESL or the UEFA, which you were saying tonight, are going to come up with a bombshell next week about Saudi. It's not going to come with that argument. So I don't understand why that's brought up, because whatever comes up next week won't be part of the arbitration decision. The judge has actually stated, he's made a statement that you've brought piracy up tonight. The judge isn't going to look at piracy. The judge is only going to judge on arbitration on one point. Are they separate? I think Shahid Fatima will prove that, and I think you'll find, Mitch said earlier, we'll find out later who's proven right. I think you'll find when that's heard, I think you'll find that the club and PIF offered a lot more information at the time when it will run through a year ago and were prevented from doing so. So I think when separation comes up, I think Newcastle will deal with it. There's something you said in the show last week with Steve, which I think is really relevant, and I think it helps us, and I think I'm on the same page as you. You said that if the competition disclosure runs, because it's obviously Competition Act is going to give big disclosure. If that runs, that could help the arbitration case. But I had a question for you, which is asking you to come. So if it doesn't run, let's suppose the competition disclosure doesn't run in time, is that right and fair? That there could be a silver bullet that would win arbitration, but because they couldn't get the case in time, the Premier League and the cartel are going to keep it. That's got to be wholly, and it's so bent, it's untrue. Because if it exists, like let's suppose there's a silver bullet in the bottom of that drawer, and what you were saying, because of timings, you might not get it out, and Newcastle might not get the takeover. Jeez, how much does somebody have to smell?
But then again, if Newcastle thought that was the case, they'd have pursued their own anti-competition a lot earlier. Remember, we've only got this overlap between the cases because of Newcastle's own delay in challenging Michael Beloff as chair. Had that not become apparent, and I'm not saying they weren't right to do that, but ultimately arbitration would be done and dusted.
I agree with you. I've lobbied
an anti-competition case in the first place.
I've lobbied the club since October to run the anti-competition case. It's my. Well, put it this way, when you say about the cases being different, I'll always take a QC's word on it. So Robert O'Donoghue phoned me up and he read the case that the club had put in. He knows our case because he built it, and he said they've run our case. And he said At one stage, we're going to run a different case, but he said, it's our case. I've just read it through, it's our case. There's obviously going to be different points, because as fans, we were never given letters from the Premier League at the procedures, whereas the club can say, you said this and you said that and you gave us this. So the club's case will have masses of minute detail and correspondence going back and forwards that we would never have, because we're not the club. We're just fans. But the technical arguments and the competition arguments that Robert O'Donoghue built and has spoken to the club about are the same points. Now the club might have some. The club might have some more. They might have some extra points, and the reason being, and the club will always, when you say about the competition case, saying about the length of delay, that was covered by O'Donoghue. That was always a major point. So don't misunderstand, and don't let me if I put myself over wrong. I don't mean the only point that we would have ran was the behind letter. What I'm saying to you is Robert O'Donoghue's main point was on time. His main argument was that you took too long to run this case. You without any argument, took longer giving the decision on this. And they were even telling government they were going to do it. So by the time the case is run and by the time the evidence comes out and that great thing disclosure comes forward, you'll have things like marching up the top of the hill and marching them down again. That in competition law is a no-no. But
so hang on, those comments were specifically relating to marching the government departments up and down a hill with regards to updating them on the PR messaging for when a takeover may or may not be resolved. That wasn't marching Newcastle United up and down a hill. That's a complete misconception. It was relating to PR messaging and marching government departments up the hill. And one of the reasons for that is because at the same time that the Premier League were being asked for an update from the government as regards the PR messaging and whether or not the takeover had run its course, they'd written to Newcastle United with that provisional conclusion. So it's understandable that they were expecting a response at some point from Newcastle and they were keeping the government departments on standby. Now, if disclosure shows that the marching up and down or the meetings were not about PR messaging and were in fact about determining a decision, I'll come back on, I'll correct myself, I'll hold my hands up, because that's...
I expected you to say that, but the other side say it's marching Newcastle up and down the hill. And I'm smiling.
But that's simply not what the letters say at all.
But you haven't seen the letter.
Complete myth. The letters are clear on who they're marching up and down the hill.
Have you seen the letters?
Well, the letters are in the public domain. That phrase is in the public domain. Of course, certain parts were redacted, but all of that information is out there. And unless disclosure suggests other correspondence, the marching up and down was about marching government departments up and down because there was no update. And why was there no update? Because Newcastle had only just received the provisional conclusion. So nobody could have known how Newcastle were going to react. And just the other thing I briefly want to say, coming back to separation, because I think it's really important, is that it all boils down to, in arbitration, if Newcastle United prove PIF is separate from the Saudi state, there'll be a pathway to a takeover. That's the simplest solution. And I agree that if they win the arbitration, sure, Mike Ashley could theoretically pursue other cases and damages, but from a Newcastle United point of view rather than a Mike Ashley point of view, and from a future point of view rather than a past point of view, there's closure, there's a new owner, and if Mike Ashley wants to keep on fighting, it effectively will have nothing to do with Newcastle United's future. However, if the Premier League prove a lack of separation, then they're doing that because at that point, if Newcastle United decide to rerun the test, which I think we all know they won't, but if they did, that's when the Premier League can reject it based on piracy. That's when the Premier League can reject it based on even potentially things like human rights. So all of these things in the back burner, political, piracy, they're there. They might not appear relevant today, but if the Premier League win arbitration and Newcastle do choose to try and pursue the acquisition, at that point, they do come back into the mix.
Can I ask a couple of questions, lads, here? Firstly, regarding the discussion that was made online recently that, this comment here that Russell's just made, the DCMS said, yep, we had meetings, and yes, we had an agenda, but no, haven't got any notes. What's going on there? And the other thing which you can help us with here, Keith, is about disclosure. I think a lot of fans seem to think that once disclosure happens in the arbitration in the CAT case, that all of that information is going to be made public. My understanding is no, it's made open between the two parties, but it won't necessarily be made public, because I think a lot of fans think we're going to get loads of juicy information on a certain date, and I'm not convinced that that's going to happen.
No, what happens is you choose your words, you do your searches, your own side get the documents. So the team representing the EPL will get all the documents that those words have pulled out. And then what they'll do is they'll go through it and they'll try and make privileged any discussions between client, EPL and lawyers. If they can prove that they will get advice off their lawyers, those documents don't come through. Once the privileged documents are taken out, they then pass through the other side. Then what you do is put paralegals on to search through the whole batch of documents you get back to pull off documents is relevant to fight your case. Whether the case, because there's a lot of competition cases, the points you fight and the arguments you fight, sometimes that's made public. But you won't, the fans and us are not going to see. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of documents. You're not going to see them. What you're going to do is you're going to get what comes out of which bits are used to fight the case. But there's something I want to say to you, Ben, is I do work with competition QCs and lawyers, every week. And what they're saying to me is, they're saying, first of all, it's hugely significant that Boris Johnson's called it a cartel. You think it isn't. And so instead of debating it, because we've got no time, they say it's hugely. So obviously I'm going to listen to them. Secondly, the Behind letter, QC's told me that will win a case. And it said the only way you could lose, the only reason that's not as irrelevant to it's irrelevant how EPL tell you, or it's irrelevant how the club decide to fight. What the QC is saying, if I went into court and I could prove that a company with a financial interest that Behind Sports have collectively lobbied people in the same competition as Newcastle, and they're competing for managers, players, transfers, sponsors, and the lot. He said that in itself, proven, will be enough to win a competition case on collective lobbying. I've got proof that letter was sent out, that actually not only was it written by the CEO, but it actually was sent out. I've got somebody behind that's confirmed that the letter has gone. But that in itself is an anti-competitive act, and there's no way to belittle it. The other thing is, when I spoke to the legal team, is MBS talking to Boris Johnson about it is not an anti-competitive act, and that's in competition law. So this is people who earn the top end of rates in the country for working in competition law. And they said, if MBS has gone to Boris Johnson and said, it's shocking what you've done, you should get that passed, that is not collective lobbying. And the reason being, Ben, I tell you, you've got to think of who's earning the money. MBS at this stage hasn't got a football club. Boris Johnson hasn't got any money in the Premier League. So when MBS says, it's shocking, Boris, what you've done, you could even turn around and say, we've given you all this work for BA, and the way you've spoken to us, asking us to be directors of a football club, is abysmal. We'd never do it to Prince Charles, the Queen. He's allowed legally to do that. Now, Behind have a financial interest, and they talk to other companies that's got a financial interest, and what they're doing is they're muddying the market. And I respect, I don't think for a minute you're trying to misguide or mislead people, but in competition terms, it's wholly inaccurate. There's no comparison between Boris Johnson.
But again, the comparison
there is no
comparison was not trying to say that there's no competition related.
Ben, there's no legal.
Just to reiterate again, though, Keith, because you're wrong in the perspective of how you're interpreting what I've said. So both of them lobbied in a form. You argue that Be-In's form of lobbying is anti-competitive, and if that's proven to be the case, then you would have evidence for that particular case. And I accept that that's an argument. But what I am saying is that MBS's form of lobbying has nothing to do with the anti-competition aspect. I'm not saying they're both anti-competitive. Yeah. I'm saying they're both lobbying. Being a lobbying in what you're saying is an anti-competitive manner. But MBS lobbying on behalf of his government undermines the separation argument. So what you've got is you've got MBS lobbying from the outside in, and that doesn't help the separation argument, which is ultimately the crux of whether this takeover will or won't happen. Whereas being a lobbying also from the outside in, but yes, it's in a different area with different consequences. But I'm not saying MBS was acting anti-competitively. I'm saying MBS was acting anti-intuitively from what PIF are hoping to gain, which is proof in practice that they're not influenced by the Saudi Arabian government.
So on competition law, what Behine's done, this is from Competition QC, is illegal. What MBS has done,
I mean, that's defamatory.
No. You spoke. Let me speak. So you spoke. Behind what they've done is legal. It's illegal in collective lobbying terms.
Allegedly.
It is illegal, and that's from council. So instead of arguing, you're arguing against council. Council's saying that's illegal.
Arguing, I'm saying that you can't just say someone's actions are illegal. You say they're allegedly illegal, and if I publish,
it's allegedly. Right now, give me thoughts. What MBS are doing, I agree, would come more to do with the arbitration point of separation. So if he lobbies, the EPL might turn around and say, well, MBS lobbied against the government. If they can prove he did lobby that. But when it came up on the meeting, few people wrote the meeting and said, what Ben said on the case with Steve was that what MBS has done, I think the words that they quoted was, what MBS has done is no worse than what Behind did. But what I was saying is in anti-competition terms, on that case, there's two separate cases. MBSs might have an impact on the arbitration case, but MBSs won't have any impact in a competition case. Arbitration, yes. Competition, no. On competition, what Behind's done is illegal. What MBS has done is nothing.
Just want to pick up on the cartel aspect as well, because I know that one of the main arguments that you've made, Keith, is that there's a big six, they dominate everything, they're influencing the Premier League. And of course, what we found over the last few weeks is that the same big six, the six biggest brands at least, even if they're not the six biggest in terms of where they currently are in the league, have also endorsed or did originally endorse the European Super League. And to me, what that shows is that the six big clubs are actually not that affiliated to the Premier League brand. And there's now this friction between the six clubs that tried to run away and came back with their tail between their legs and the Premier League. And that same European Super League will be proven to have been Saudi funded as well. You can call it JP Morgan for now, but again, watch this space over the next couple of weeks. So my question is how you can still think that the Premier League are making decisions based on these so-called big six clubs and pandering to these so-called big six clubs, because I think the Premier League as a brand would want a strong Newcastle, would want a strong Leicester. I think they want the 20th strongest clubs that they can possibly get, as long as they're legal, as long as they're well run, as long as there's no risk or reputational damage. I still don't understand why you think that this is, and I'm asking you genuinely to explain it, so I'm not trying to be contentious and asking you this. But I genuinely want to know why you think the big six are actually stopping the takeover with Premier League endorsement. I understand the argument that the big six might, separate to the Premier League, not want a strong Newcastle, but why do you think the Premier League don't want a strong Newcastle?
First hint I got of that was off Amanda Staveley, and what she said was that she was involved in the first application, and she quoted to the public and said, really, the Newcastle fans to get behind, and that's why I came forward. And what she said was that particularly, I think the clubs, whether she mentioned them, others, was Tottenham and Liverpool. So what I did was I did some research, and I picked up a lot of information where Tottenham and Liverpool and others were lobbying to stop Newcastle. I think you'll find, let disclosure come forward, like you say, we'll come back on when disclosure's been in. And when disclosure comes through, I think you'll prove that those people didn't reject the Behind letter. So when they didn't, I can tell you, just put my cards on the table. You've told me a good journalist. I've been involved in a case that consumed over 50 million fees on competition. So I know it back to front. And as far as a purveyor or a buyer of competition action, I'll probably be in that small league of people that's run cases of that size against the cartel. When you turn around and spend that kind of money on competition actions, you are able to see what's illegal and what your QCs are going after and what they're not. And on the Behind letter landing on Tottenham and Liverpool's desk, we've had it from really good authority that they didn't distance themselves. And when you get a collective lobby letter that you don't distance yourself from, you're in the brown stuff. No matter what anybody wants to tell you, no matter what Richard Massa wants to say, and I'll promise you one thing, Ben, the Premier League, if this goes to disclosure, won't be talking like you're talking at the minute. They'll pull you back off, and they'll pull all the other journalists back off and shout their argument. and the truth will start to come out. And if disclosure hits, now I will meet you online. If disclosure hits, it's game over. If disclosure comes through, if I think you summed it up on Steve's show well, you said, you know, it's obviously Newcastle's interest to get disclosure through before arbitration comes through. You know, that's what you said, and I agree with you. I agree with you that disclosure will produce more silver bullets. But it's my opinion that there's enough silver bullets now to win a competition case. The problem is, like you say, if the arbitration case runs ahead, and let's suppose the Premier League were to win that, that makes it changes things. There's still a route through competition to do it, and that's why I was pushing the club to run a competition action from October last year. You know, and you said something. The only thing you've said tonight that I thought was disingenuous. You said your case isn't this. You don't know what my case is. You haven't seen my case. You haven't seen the clubs, and I've seen both. So what I'm saying to you is, I know what I did. I know what fingerprint I put on it, and I know what direction I put on it. And it was done by a QC. It wasn't Keith Patterson sitting in his shed doing it. It was done by one of the top QCs. And those arguments, he's picked that up since, and he said this: it's our case with stuff wrapped around it. And when it runs,
stuff wrapped around it. Just elaborate on that. No, elaborate on that. You said stuff wrapped around it. The stuff wrapped around it is the integral core part that differentiates.
No, it's not. Stuff wrapped around it is the club having the benefit of all the correspondence that they had with the Premier League. So the club can put specifics on that case of like what happened when they did the application. They can describe what was going on in them 17 weeks that we couldn't. So wrapped around it, and I'll quantify, is the QC saying to me, they'll have the benefit of all the detail that was going on back and forwards, and they'll be able to say, you did that, you said that. So they'll have far, far better finite detail. But the key is, Ben, when disclosure hits, watch the reversing tanks come. You watch people back away.
Just two really quick things. First of all, just for balance, disclosure obviously operates on both sides, and I think it would be naive to assume that there won't also be potentially negative disclosure, and we all just have to wait and see, and what goes in the public domain and what is just beneficial to one or both parties. But the second thing I guess I just want to ask you is, if Newcastle are that confident that the disclosure will benefit the wider takeover, and given Newcastle are also in control of when arbitration starts, why do you think Newcastle are not themselves pushing to start arbitration later? Because ultimately Newcastle United and the Premier League have the ability to prep their case, and in arbitration what tends to happen is all of the bulk of the time that leads from the original terms of reference all the way through to the award/remedy, the bulk of the time is in the prepping the case. So why do you think Newcastle are happy to proceed in July if they think that that may only have a percentage chance of beneficial disclosure being released in time?
I think one of the concerns, I mean, you asking me to guess what I think the reason is, because you don't know and I don't know. So I would say the best guess you could put on that is to keep PIF at the table. I would say it involves a new season. So I think timing is critical, because I think if this goes into next season and if PIF were to walk away, I think it changes the dynamics. But if it had been me, I'd have run this last October. And I think if we'd run it last October, I think Newcastle would have different owners now. And I think if when disclosure gets done, disclosure will smash the Premier League. And as far as the ESL goes, the legal team, I've had a text while I've been talking to you tonight, the legal team is saying it's massive, and you know the reason they say it's massive is they give us a note this week that he said the market is 20 clubs. That's what a competition case will hear. There's 20 clubs where 6 have privileges beyond the others, and 6 have the ability to put themselves before the other 14. That is a cartel market, and that's what will break this case.
Great stuff. We're going to stop it there because Ben does have to go for his train. Yeah. Ben, honestly, thank you so much for coming on, mate. And I knew you'd be a great guest, mate, with Keith, etc. And I apologise to those who were expecting maybe it's the regular show, but honestly, I think most people in the chat, and you'll have seen the comments, Ben, Keith, Steve, Mitch, everyone's thoroughly enjoyed it. You know, more or less, everyone's been gripped. And no matter which side of the fence you're on, which opinion you think of, the most important thing was a healthy debate, and that is what we got. So once again, Ben, who's a great friend of the show, and I'm sure we'll have him back on again at some point. Thank you so much. Go and get your train, mate. Have a great weekend and a great bank holiday.
Yeah, I will. And just to finish by saying, again, massive respect for Keith. And we'll disagree on certain points, but it's not because there's an agenda to actually derail the takeover at my end.
I agree with you.
Because Keith has an agenda to give information that he also doesn't believe in. You've got a passionate Newcastle fan who's put his time and energy and money behind it. You've got a journalist who has a good amount of sources on a good amount of sides. And we know that there's competing narratives, and we know that there's a whole bunch of information out there. And I think I would finish by just saying that whatever happens, I think the vast majority of Newcastle fans want this to be over. Of course, the vast majority also want Ashley out and a new owner. But whatever happens, Newcastle fans want closure because the club's in limbo. Newcastle United fans want to know who their long-term manager is, what their long-term ownership group is. And as I say, a lot would want that to be PIF and Saudi Arabia. But if it's not to be the case, they still don't want a football club in limbo. So I've got massive respect for the fan base. I've got massive respect for the history of the club. And I enjoy a healthy debate. So thanks for having me on.
Good stuff. And Ben, do you still want to swap party for Joe Linton, says Sonny?
It wasn't Joe Linton, it was Joe Willock.
Can I ask one question, Ben?
It's got to be quick. He's got a train to catch.
Ben, do you think if all the evidence and disclosure was done, right, suppose it's all on the table, with it about how the ESL was formed and everything, do you think the takeover would go through then? If it was all out, all the disclosure, what do you think would really happen?
I think that if the disclosure in its full entity came out, including things like the ESL, then I think the Premier League would be confident of links between the ESL and Saudi Arabia. And I also think the Premier League would stick to their guns on separation, argue that in arbitration. And if they win that, it puts Newcastle in a very difficult position. But if disclosure, so we're talking about full disclosure, shows any element of corruption on the Premier League's part, shows any element of dragging their feet on the Premier League's part, then what you effectively have is a whole bunch of subplot narratives that call into question whether or not we should have even been debating separation in the first place. And that can have repercussions. So naturally, you'd need to see what the disclosure is. And I do genuinely think that there'll be disclosure that benefits both sides. But if it's all out there and all open, ironically, I still think we come down to that simple question again, which is, can Newcastle United either show, A, the separation debate shouldn't be happening in the first place because the Premier League don't have the right to? And part of that, by the way, is semantics as well, because they're not just going to be debating PIF and whether a letter from the Royal Court has any relevance. That's a small part of it. They're going to be going into the semantics of what the test says. How do you define the word control? How do you define the word director? Is that relevant to the Saudi Arabian state, and so on? But fundamentally, Newcastle United either need to show, one, that the separation debate shouldn't have even happened in the first place, and the Premier League were just using that as a red herring, as a decoy to delay things. And if disclosure shows those delays, the Premier League are in big, big trouble. Or two, that the separation question is fair and relevant, in which case I think a lot of the disclosure won't be factored into the arbitration, which has a very specific terms of reference, in which case it's a straight debate over how is PIF classified. Legally, it's separate. In practical terms, there's question marks over it. So it's sort of interesting how we have this big debate. There's a lot of detail. There's a lot of possibility. There's a lot of conflicting opinions. But fundamentally, we're sort of still back where we started, which is we are to win arbitration.
I tell you something, it's as though that Premier League, that European Super League didn't start. I mean, Jesus. It's
right,
the biggest
we've got to finish. He's got a train to catch, and I didn't want him to miss it. Ben, thanks very much, mate. Take care. We'll let you drop out.
All the best.
Masters will pick him up.
Great. Oh, I'm glad I knocked him off before you heard you say that. Listen, great debate, lads. Fantastic show as always. And honestly, big thank you to Ben for that, because it's not difficult coming on when you're coming on to a show full of Newcastle fans. He's a Leicester fan. He's a journalist. He's got an opinion, and he's got an opinion a lot of people believe in. Keith, thought your questions were great. Mitch and Steve, it was just great to watch, wasn't it, guys? Fantastic to watch. It was fascinating, and as I say, big thank you to Ben.
Yeah, it was fascinating. I mean, I've just got a message saying that was the quietest I've ever been for 2 hours in my life, But you know what? I mean, I had loads of questions, but every question got answered, or every question got put forward by Keith. There was a structure. it's very interesting to looking back. I've got we referred to the Masters letter, the response to the Artachi and Wura, where they came out and made various statements. At one point, they even say that they're gonna review the owners and directors test. So don't worry, They talk about the owners and directors test having intellectual property infringements involved in it, which I must admit, I went through the Premier League's rule book and I couldn't find anything that said you can't be an owner or director if you infringe property rights. But there's a lot of semantics. I mean, that word was used right at the very end there, and I found it fascinating.
I'm sure we've debated over the coming weeks, guys, but I've got a pint. I've got to go and get a drink.
I think the last thing I want to say is that for the fans who's watching is the legal teams who work in competition every day say that Boris Johnson calling it a cartel is hugely significant. They say that the behind letter is a case winner, and it's just how it's played and how when they prove that these companies haven't distanced themselves, that's significant. The time it took them to make the answers is hugely significant. And they haven't even done disclosure yet. And what they're saying is, when he's saying disclosures both sides, yeah, they do look at Newcastle's documents. So what you're going to get there? When you look at Newcastle's, why they got the takeover. So there's nothing going to come out of disclosure that's going to hurt Newcastle. But I'll tell you what, it will bring them to the knees. And I'll be amazed if it doesn't. So
I've always been fascinated, however, with this business of, we talk about the Premier League, when in effect the Premier League is 20 shareholders with an executive board who act on behalf of those 20 shareholders. Those 20 shareholders being the football clubs that are in the Premier League for that particular season. But we've seen the situation time and time again, and it's been reported that the top six met 40 times outside the other 14.
Amazing.
And that simply tells you that they have far, far more influence with the executive board than anybody else. And the other 14 are basically just serfs to whatever the six want, and the executive board bow down to them. And that's my understanding for an awful long time. And it was shown to us that is what it's about when that disclosure, that's that word again, came out. And I'm sure Mitch is in exactly the same position as me with his head on thinking about that one.
Right, I've got to go, lads. We've got to finish, because my mates have been out since 4:30, and you know what it's like. If I go out any later, they'll all be talking Chinese or Swahili, and I'll not understand a word.
I'd be going home myself. I wouldn't like I'm meeting them.
Exactly. But a couple of the lads got there late, so sorry, guys. I'm not having an extra half an hour. Lots of people asking for extra half an hour. We can discuss it all next week. We'll finish with this from Ian Johnson. He says, I'm surprised you chose the Fab Four, given the Beatles split up was your fault. Thanks, mate. Brilliant stuff.
We'll put the competition results out online.
I've already done it. It was up on the screen before. You were falling asleep, I think.
Did somebody get mine? Did somebody answer mine?
Yeah. The answers will go up from John. I've got to go, guys. I'll take.
Joe Royal.
Yeah, Q-Tech. Can you stick them up online? John from Q-Tech.
Mine was Joe Royal.
Yeah. See you, lads. Bye.
See ya.
Good night.
Critics attack. It feels like I've been talking to myself again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in